As the world watched the solemn farewell to Britain's longest reigning monarch, an entirely different drama was unfolding far from the cameras. While royal mourners stood in silence and centuries of tradition played out before a grieving nation, a quiet legal move was being executed behind palace walls. Within minutes of the Queen's private funeral ending, a single document would begin circulating through royal legal offices, one that would quietly change the ownership of one of the Crown's most historic residences. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Across the United Kingdom and far beyond its borders, millions of people were united in grief. The Queen had been a constant presence for decades, a symbol of continuity that seemed almost immune to the passing of time. Her death did not simply mark the end of a reign, it marked the end of an era that had defined generations. As the royal family gathered in private to say their final goodbye, the emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. For once, the divisions, tensions, and quiet rivalries that often lingered within the palace walls seemed to fade away, replaced by a shared sense of loss that no title or tradition could soften. The funeral itself carried centuries of ritual, a carefully choreographed farewell designed to honor the gravity of the crown. Yet behind that solemn unity, something else was quietly unfolding, something far more calculated than anyone outside the palace could imagine. Unlike the public ceremony that the world had witnessed with reverence and fascination, the Queen's private family service was hidden from cameras and shielded from the press. It was an intimate moment reserved only for those closest to her. In many ways, that privacy made the occasion even more powerful. Without the gaze of the public, the royals were simply a family mourning their matriarch. Yet it also created a rare environment where decisions could be made quietly, without scrutiny. The absence of cameras meant there were no journalists watching every gesture, no commentators dissecting every glance or whisper. Within those quiet walls, the royal family stood together in reflection, unaware that a moment of legal significance was already beginning to take shape elsewhere. At the center of that emerging mystery was Bagshot House, an estate whose significance extended far beyond its elegant architecture and tranquil grounds. For generations, Bagshot had been more than just a residence. It represented stability within the royal household, a place where duty and tradition quietly coexisted with the personal lives of those who served the crown. The estate carried an aura of continuity, as though the rhythms of royal life had been gently woven into its very foundations. Its halls had witnessed private conversations, family milestones, and moments of strategic planning that would never appear in official records. To outsiders, it may have seemed like another stately property within the monarchy's vast portfolio. But inside royal circles, Bagshot held a deeper meaning, a symbol of trust, stewardship, and quiet authority. Throughout the private funeral, Sophie maintained a presence that some observers would later describe as strikingly composed. Grief surrounded the gathering, yet she appeared measured and calm, attentive to the rituals unfolding around her, while maintaining a quiet sense of control. Those who knew her well were accustomed to that demeanor. Sophie had long been regarded as someone who understood the delicate balance between emotion and duty. She rarely sought attention, rarely allowed her personal feelings to overshadow the responsibilities that came with royal life. And on that day, as the family mourned together, she carried herself with the same quiet discipline that had defined her years within the monarchy. Yet in hindsight, some would begin to wonder whether her composure hinted at something more, an awareness that events beyond the funeral itself were already in motion. Because just minutes after the private service concluded, a sudden ripple of activity moved through the palace's legal offices. Administrative staff who had expected the day to remain subdued suddenly found themselves dealing with an urgent request. Instructions arrived through discreet channels, directing attention toward a specific matter involving Bagshot House. The request was not loud, not dramatic, but it carried an unmistakable sense of urgency. Royal legal clerks began processing documents with unusual speed, their quiet professionalism masking a growing curiosity about what exactly they had been asked to handle. Then came the moment that would spark the first whispers. As the paperwork moved through internal systems, a name appeared where none of the staff expected it. Sophie's name, attached to a document connected to the registration of Bagshot House. For a brief moment, confusion spread among the aides responsible for reviewing the filing. Property transfers involving royal estates were rarely handled in such a direct or immediate manner. Typically, such decisions were accompanied by formal announcements, ceremonial acknowledgements, or at the very least, internal briefings explaining the change. But this filing arrived without explanation, its quiet presence raising questions that no one seemed prepared to answer. And perhaps the most unsettling detail of all was the timing. Within royal protocol, timing carries enormous significance. Every gesture, every statement, every administrative decision is carefully aligned with tradition and symbolism. Major property matters are usually addressed through deliberate public processes designed to reflect the continuity of the crown. Yet this registration appeared to bypass those conventions entirely. Instead of a ceremonial declaration or official notice, there was only a document quietly circulating through the palace system, bearing Sophie's name and linked to Bagshot House. For the aides who first noticed it, the discovery felt almost surreal. The monarchy had just laid its longest reigning queen to rest, and already something unexpected was unfolding behind the scenes. No one spoke openly about it at first. The palace was still in mourning, and speculation during such a moment would have seemed deeply inappropriate. Yet the questions lingered in hushed conversations and thoughtful glances exchanged across office desks. Why now? Why so quickly? And why without any explanation? But while the world remained focused on mourning the Queen, the real mystery was only beginning because Bagshot House was never meant to change hands so quietly. To most observers, Bagshot House seemed like just another royal residence, grand, historic, but largely symbolic. Yet within palace circles, the estate had always held far greater significance. Behind its elegant gates and ancient trees lay a property tied to royal influence, legacy, and quiet authority. And if Sophie truly registered it under her name that night, the implications for the royal balance of power could be far greater than anyone imagined. Long before whispers of secret documents and unexpected filings began circulating through palace corridors, Bagshot House had already carved out a quiet but powerful place within the story of the monarchy. It was never the most famous royal residence. It did not dominate headlines like Buckingham Palace, nor did it carry the mythic aura of Windsor. Instead, Bagshot existed in a different category, one defined by quiet continuity rather than spectacle. For generations, it had functioned as a place where royal life unfolded away from the pressures of public attention. Yet within that quiet reputation lay something far more meaningful. Bagshot House had long been woven into the private structure of royal authority, a residence that symbolized stability within a monarchy built upon centuries of tradition. Its origins stretched deep into the royal estate network, a system carefully constructed over time to support both the ceremonial and personal lives of Britain's ruling family. Some properties served as national symbols, while others operated as working residences where members of the royal family could carry out their duties with relative privacy. Bagshot belonged firmly to the latter category. It was a place of residence, certainly, but it was also a place where influence quietly circulated. Conversations held within its walls rarely appeared in official records, yet they often carried weight within the internal dynamics of the monarchy. Senior figures within the royal household understood this unspoken reality well. Bagshot was not merely a place to live, it was a place where decisions could be shaped without the noise of public scrutiny. Part of its importance came from geography as much as history. Positioned close enough to the monarchy's central hubs to remain relevant, yet distant enough to allow genuine privacy, Bagshot occupied a strategic location within the royal landscape. It allowed those who resided there to remain connected to the heart of royal operations, while maintaining a degree of independence from the constant spotlight that followed the most senior figures of the crown. For many within the palace system, that balance made the estate uniquely valuable. It provided proximity to influence while preserving the discretion royal politics often required. Over the years, Bagshot had quietly earned a reputation as a retreat for private discussions that could not take place elsewhere. Senior members of the royal family occasionally retreated there for conversations too delicate for official settings. Sensitive planning sessions, family consultations, and moments of quiet strategic thinking had all unfolded within its walls. The estate carried a quiet authority precisely because it did not attract attention. And in the world of monarchy, where every public gesture can carry political consequences, that kind of privacy is not simply convenient, it is powerful. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Bagshot House was not its history or its influence. It was the unusual structure surrounding its ownership. Like many royal residences, the estate existed within a complicated framework of trusts, custodial arrangements, and long-standing legal traditions. Technically, many such properties were not owned personally by the individuals who lived in them. Instead, they were held under arrangements designed to preserve royal heritage across generations. The monarch, the crown, and various royal trusts all played roles in maintaining those properties as part of a broader institutional legacy. That structure ensured continuity, preventing any single individual from claiming personal ownership of a residence tied to the monarchy's history, which is why the alleged registration of Bagshot House under Sophie's name raised such profound questions. If the document circulating through royal legal channels was genuine, it suggested something highly unusual had taken place. Personal registration of a property so deeply connected to royal tradition would represent a significant departure from the norms that governed the monarchy's estate network. Even seasoned palace observers struggled to recall a similar precedent. Yet within certain legal circles connected to the royal household, there had always been quiet whispers about the existence of a rarely discussed clause buried deep within royal property law. According to some insiders, specific circumstances could allow a residence to pass directly into personal ownership, though such conditions were extraordinarily rare. The details of this clause remained largely unknown outside a small circle of legal experts tasked with managing royal estates. Most members of the public had never heard of it. Even many palace staff members were unaware that such a possibility existed. If that clause had indeed been activated, it would mean the document bearing Sophie's name was not simply a routine filing. It would represent the execution of a legal pathway that had likely been considered, discussed, and carefully planned long before the Queen's funeral. And that possibility only deepened the mystery surrounding the timing of the registration. Because Sophie was not a distant figure suddenly appearing within the story of Bagshot House, her connection to the estate ran deep. For years, it had served as her home alongside Prince Edward, providing a base from which they carried out their royal duties. Within the complex structure of the monarchy, the couple had developed a reputation for reliability and discretion. They were rarely at the center of public controversy. Instead, they operated quietly, supporting the broader work of the crown while maintaining a stable presence within the royal household. That stability had earned Sophie significant trust over the years. Palace insiders often described her as someone who understood the delicate balance required to navigate royal life. She was neither impulsive nor reckless. Her decisions were typically measured, careful, and rooted in a deep understanding of the institution she served. Which is why the sudden appearance of her name on a property registration connected to Bagshot House felt so startling to those who first encountered it. It raised an unsettling possibility that no one inside the palace seemed eager to address directly. Perhaps this move had not been spontaneous at all. Perhaps it had been quietly prepared in advance, waiting for the precise moment when circumstances would allow it to be executed without resistance. If that were true, then the registration of Bagshot House was not merely about property or residence. It was about positioning, about influence, about securing a place within the evolving structure of royal power. And as that realization slowly began to settle among the small group of people who understood what Bagshot House truly represented, the silence surrounding Sophie's decision began to feel even more mysterious. Yet if Bagshot House held such significance, the bigger mystery was why Sophie would act so quickly and so secretly on the very day the Queen was laid to rest. Timing can reveal everything, and according to palace insiders, Sophie's legal move happened not days later, not even hours later, but within minutes of the Queen's private funeral ending. While other royals remained in quiet reflection, documents were already being processed through discreet legal channels. The question haunting palace observers ever since: why would such a significant move happen at the exact moment the monarchy was most vulnerable? The moments following the Queen's private funeral were meant to be filled with silence, reflection, and the quiet weight of farewell. For the royal family, it was the closing of a chapter that had shaped their lives for decades, the private service had ended without spectacle, leaving the family gathered together in the fragile stillness that follows grief. Yet while many remained absorbed in mourning, a complex, different sequence of events had already begun unfolding behind palace doors. It did not happen slowly. It did not wait for the family to recover from the emotional gravity of the day. Instead, it moved with striking precision, as though a clock had been silently counting down to the moment the service ended. According to several individuals familiar with palace procedures, the timeline began almost immediately, within minutes of the private ceremony concluding. An internal notification appeared within the royal administrative system. The message itself was brief and procedural, but it carried an instruction that instantly drew attention. A property registration connected to Bagshot House had been submitted for review. At first glance, such a filing might have seemed routine. Royal estates frequently required administrative adjustments, legal updates, and formal documentation. Yet something about this particular submission was different. The urgency attached to it, the timing, and most importantly, the name attached to the document. The filing had not arrived through the slow, layered channels that typically governed royal property matters. Instead, it had been delivered through an expedited legal pathway normally reserved for urgent institutional changes. Palace lawyers who first encountered the submission reportedly paused when they saw the details. This was not a ceremonial transfer prepared months in advance with public announcements and coordinated briefings. It was a direct registration request moving rapidly through the internal system. And as they began reviewing the paperwork, one detail immediately stood out: the name on the signature line, Sophie. For a moment, the room reportedly fell quiet, not because Sophie's connection to Bagshot House was unexpected after all. She had lived there for years alongside Prince Edward, but because personal registration of such a residence was anything but ordinary. Within the structure of royal estate management, properties like Bagshot rarely changed hands in this manner. They existed within a complex web of trusts, custodial arrangements, and institutional oversight. Any shift in that structure typically required extended consultation and careful planning. Yet the document now circulating through the system suggested something far more immediate had been initiated. Senior legal advisors were quickly notified, and their reaction only deepened the sense of urgency surrounding the filing. Some reportedly questioned whether the document had been submitted prematurely. Others wondered whether the timing had been deliberate. Because within royal administrative systems, property registrations do not simply appear. They pass through multiple stages of verification, each designed to ensure compliance with centuries of legal tradition. For Sophie's name to reach the final stages of review so quickly meant that the groundwork for this move had likely been prepared long before that day. This realization forced palace staff to confront a possibility that felt almost unsettling. If the document had been prepared in advance, then the moment of its submission had likely been chosen with extraordinary care, and that brought attention back to the one detail. No one could ignore the timing. The registration had been filed not days after the Queen's passing, not after formal mourning periods had concluded, but within minutes of the private funeral itself. That detail alone raised a cascade of questions inside the palace. The royal administrative system, designed to handle centuries-old traditions with precision and discretion, suddenly found itself processing something that felt unusually strategic. Property registrations within the monarchy were rarely urgent. They unfolded gradually, often accompanied by internal consultations and legal reviews that stretched across weeks or even months. Yet, this filing moved through the system with remarkable speed. Each step of the review process appeared to have been anticipated in advance, allowing the document to move forward without delay, and that only intensified the quiet tension among the lawyers responsible for reviewing it. Because the speed of the filing suggested something more than administrative efficiency, it hinted at a legal window, an exact moment when the registration needed to occur in order to trigger a specific clause within royal property law. A clause that few people fully understood, but while it could potentially allow Bagshot House to be registered directly under Sophie's name. If that clause had indeed been activated, the timing of the filing would not have been random at all. It would have been precise, calculated, almost surgical in its execution. Yet even as that possibility began circulating quietly among palace staff, Another question refused to fade into the background. Legal documents do not simply move through royal systems without authorization. Somewhere along the chain of command, someone had approved this move. Someone had given the instruction that allowed the registration to proceed at that exact moment. And that realization introduced a new layer of mystery that no one inside the palace seemed eager to confront openly. Because if Sophie had acted alone, the consequences could be significant. But if she had acted with approval, if someone powerful within the royal family had quietly authorized the move, then the registration of Bagshot House might represent something far larger than a simple property transfer. It might represent a carefully planned shift in royal influence. But as whispers of the registration began circulating among palace staff, another question quickly surfaced: who inside the royal family knew about it? Inside the palace walls, news travels quietly, but fast. By the time the evening shadows settled over the royal estates, a handful of senior aides had already seen the document. What began as confusion soon turned into uneasy silence, because if the filing was legitimate, it meant one thing: a major royal property had just changed hands without a single public word. The first people to encounter the registration were not senior royals or public officials. They were the quiet administrators who formed the hidden backbone of the royal household, the individuals responsible for ensuring that centuries of tradition continue to function smoothly behind the scenes. These were professionals accustomed to routine, to carefully structured procedures that rarely deviated from established patterns. Yet when the Bagshot House filing appeared in the internal system, even these seasoned staff members paused. Something about the document did not align with the rhythms they knew so well. It carried the markings of urgency, but none of the ceremonial preparation that usually accompanied royal property matters. At first, the reaction was simple confusion. Administrators began reviewing the details with cautious attention, searching for any indication that the filing had been submitted prematurely or mistakenly. Royal estate documents were normally circulated through layers of approval before reaching the stage of registration. But this one had arrived already prepared, already formatted, already carrying the essential signatures that allowed it to move forward. And most striking of all was the name attached to the document, Sophie's name, placed directly within the line that indicated personal registration. That single detail changed the atmosphere within the office almost immediately. Questions began forming quietly in the minds of the staff, reviewing the paperwork. Was this a temporary legal arrangement, a technical adjustment tied to residence status, or was it something far more significant? No one spoke loudly about it, but the uncertainty lingered in the room like a shadow. Within minutes, the document was escalated to senior advisors, responsible for overseeing royal estate matters. These individuals had spent years navigating the delicate intersection between tradition and law that governed the monarchy's vast network of properties. If anyone could explain the meaning behind the filing, it would be them. Yet when the document reached their desks, the reaction was not immediate clarity. Instead, there was a pause, a moment of careful examination that seemed to stretch longer than anyone expected. Some advisors reportedly leaned back in their chairs, studying the registration details with quiet intensity. Others began cross-referencing internal records, searching for prior discussions that might explain the sudden move. The deeper they looked, the more unusual the situation appeared. Bagshot House was not a minor estate tucked away in obscurity. It was a residence closely tied to the royal family's private structure. Any alteration to its legal status would normally involve extended consultations at the highest levels of the household, yet no such consultation appeared in the administrative records. As word spread among a small circle of palace officials, whispers began circulating through the corridors of the royal household. Staff members who had heard fragments of the story began asking cautious questions of one another. Had there been a new directive from senior leadership? Had the king personally approved a change to Bagshot House's status? Or had the move been arranged quietly in advance, known only to a select few individuals inside the palace? The uncertainty created an atmosphere of tension that was difficult to ignore. In an institution built upon careful coordination and strict protocol, surprises of this magnitude were rare. The royal household functioned like a complex machine, each component aware of its role within the larger structure. When something unexpected appeared within that system, the disruption could be felt immediately. And yet, despite the confusion, no official response emerged, no urgent meeting was called, no directive was issued to halt the registration process. Instead, a strange silence settled over the matter. The document continued moving through the administrative system as though nothing unusual had occurred. For some staff members, that silence felt more unsettling than the filing itself, because silence within the monarchy can often mean only one thing: that the matter has already been acknowledged at a level far above those asking the questions. Naturally, the most pressing questions soon centered on the one person whose authority ultimately defined the structure of royal estates: the king. Had he been informed of the registration before it occurred? Had he quietly authorized the move as part of a broader plan for the monarchy's future? Or had the filing appeared without his knowledge, leaving advisors to navigate an uncomfortable situation behind the scenes? No clear answer surfaced that evening. And then there was Prince Edward. As Sophie's husband and longtime resident of Bagshot House, his position within the unfolding mystery was impossible to ignore. Yet, according to those familiar with the internal discussions that followed, Edward remained notably silent. No public statement was issued, no clarification offered through palace channels. His absence from the conversation only deepened the intrigue surrounding the registration. If he had been involved, he showed no sign of it, and if he had not been involved, his silence raised questions of its own. The palace itself maintained the same measured restraint that had defined royal communication for generations. There were no official announcements regarding Bagshot House, no acknowledgement of a property transfer. Inquiries from curious staff members were met with polite deflection, the kind of careful language designed to discourage speculation without revealing any new information. In many ways, the silence became the story, because within royal history, controversies rarely remain hidden for long. Yet in this case, the palace appeared determined to let the matter fade quietly into the background. The registration existed within the administrative system, but beyond those few who had seen the document, the outside world remained unaware that anything unusual had occurred. For some observers within the royal household, that silence suggested something deeply deliberate. It implied that the registration had not been an impulsive decision made in a moment of grief or confusion. Instead, it hinted at planning that had likely begun long before the Queen's funeral, and as palace insiders began reflecting on the precise timing of the filing, a new possibility slowly began to take shape. Perhaps the moment chosen for the registration had not been accidental at all. Perhaps it had been the culmination of a carefully constructed plan, waiting for the exact circumstances that would allow it to unfold without resistance. But the deeper investigators dug into the timing of the registration, the more one possibility began to emerge: this might not have been a spontaneous move at all. In the final weeks before her passing, the Queen reportedly held a series of unusually private meetings with several members of the royal family. No minutes were recorded, no official summaries released, but palace sources would later claim that one conversation, in particular, focused on the future of Bagshot House and the person the Queen believed should protect it. Those final weeks were filled with a quiet urgency that only a handful of people inside the palace fully understood. The Queen had spent her entire life guarding the continuity of the crown, navigating decades of political change, family tensions, and shifting public expectations. Yet as time began to press more heavily upon her, those closest to her noticed something subtle but unmistakable. Her focus had shifted. Conversations that once centered on daily duties and ceremonial obligations began turning toward the future, toward the stability of the monarchy after she was gone. The meetings themselves were remarkably discreet. Unlike formal royal briefings that produced carefully documented records, these gatherings were arranged quietly and kept deliberately small. Only a select number of individuals were invited to attend, and even among those present, the details of what was discussed remained closely guarded. Palace aides later described the atmosphere of those meetings as reflective, almost contemplative. The Queen was not delivering instructions in the commanding tone she had used throughout her reign. Instead, she was speaking with the measured wisdom of someone who understood that her time was nearing its conclusion. Among the many subjects believed to have surfaced during those conversations was the question of royal residences, particularly those that existed outside the most visible structures of the monarchy. For decades, properties like Bagshot House had served as quiet pillars within the royal ecosystem. They were not grand symbols of state power, yet they played essential roles within the private functioning of the family. They were places where discussions could happen without the glare of international attention, places where future plans could be shaped away, roam the pressures of ceremony. According to whispers that later emerged within the palace, Bagshot House was mentioned during one of those final meetings. The discussion was not about luxury or inheritance. It was about protection. The Queen reportedly expressed concern that certain royal properties might face uncertain futures as the monarchy transitioned into a new era. Times were changing rapidly, and the structures that had preserved royal stability for generations were beginning to feel the strain of modern scrutiny. In that context, the question of stewardship became deeply personal. The Queen had always believed that the strength of the monarchy depended not only on tradition, but on the character of those entrusted with its legacy. And in those final reflections, one name reportedly surfaced more than once: Sophie. By that point, Sophie had spent years quietly proving herself within the royal family. She had entered royal life without the intense public drama that often surrounded other figures within the monarchy. Instead, she built her reputation slowly, step by step, demonstrating loyalty not through grand gestures, but through steady commitment. She rarely sought the spotlight, yet she consistently delivered when duty called. Over time, that quiet reliability began to earn her something far more valuable than headlines: trust. For the Queen, trust was never given lightly. Throughout her reign, she had witnessed the complexities of royal life test even the strongest relationships. Loyalty could shift, public perception could change overnight, but Sophie remained consistent, navigating the pressures of royal responsibility with calm discipline. That steadiness had not gone unnoticed. Some palace insiders later suggested that during one of those final private meetings, the Queen may have offered what could only be described as an informal blessing. It was not a formal decree. No official document recorded the exchange, but those familiar with the conversation believed the Queen had expressed a quiet confidence in Sophie's ability to safeguard certain aspects of the royal legacy, Bagshot House among them. If that interpretation was accurate, it would explain why the estate carried such emotional significance in the days following the Queen's passing. Bagshot House was not merely a residence connected to Sophie's life. It had become symbolic of a responsibility quietly passed from one generation to the next. In the Queen's mind, securing its future may have been less about ownership and more about ensuring that a trusted guardian remained in place during a moment of royal transition. And the timing of that concern would have been entirely understandable. The monarchy was entering one of the most delicate periods in its modern history. With the Queen gone, a new chapter was beginning, one that would inevitably reshape the structure of royal authority. In moments like that, even seemingly small decisions could carry enormous consequences. That emotional weight may have lingered in Sophie's mind during the days surrounding the funeral. Grief has a way of sharpening priorities, forcing people to confront responsibilities they might otherwise postpone. If Sophie truly believed she had been entrusted with the future of Bagshot House, waiting weeks or months to secure its legal status might have felt like an unnecessary risk. Because once the Queen was gone, the delicate balance of royal decision-making would inevitably begin to shift. And if Bagshot House had indeed been part of the Queen's final reflections, ensuring its protection quickly might have felt less like an opportunistic move and more like an act of loyalty to the monarch she had served for so many years. If the Queen had indeed hinted at such a move, then Sophie's decisio might not have been a rebellion but something far more strategic. For years, Sophie had quietly operated in the background of royal life, dutiful, loyal, rarely attracting headlines, yet insiders increasingly described her as one of the monarchy's most trusted figures. Behind the scenes, she was known for careful planning, discretion, and an ability to navigate palace politics without drawing attention, which raises the question: was the Bagshot move the culmination of years of quiet preparation? When Sophie first entered royal life, few people predicted she would eventually become one of the monarchy's most steady and trusted figures. In the early years, she was often described as the quiet one, the royal who carried out her duties without fanfare, while other members of the family found themselves under constant media scrutiny. Sophie seemed to exist just outside the storm. Her appearances were professional, but understated. Her work was consistent, but rarely sensational. For many observers, she appeared to be a supporting figure within the vast machinery of the royal household, a reliable presence, but not a central force shaping its direction. But inside the palace, reputations are not built on headlines. They are built on reliability, and over time, Sophie began earning something far more valuable than public attention: trust. Palace staff noticed how carefully she approached her responsibilities, rarely making impulsive decisions or chasing publicity. She studied the inner workings of royal life with patience, learning how traditions operated and where the real levers of influence quietly existed. That patience would eventually become one of her greatest strengths. Her relationship with the Queen played a crucial role in that transformation. The Queen valued loyalty above almost everything else, and she had an extraordinary ability to recognize it in others. Over the years, Sophie proved again and again that she could be relied upon, not just to represent the crown in public, but to uphold its values in private moments where few people were watching. She carried out difficult engagements without complaint, supported charitable causes with genuine commitment, and never allowed the pressures of royal life to disrupt her sense of discipline. Gradually, the dynamic between Sophie and the Queen deepened. What had begun as a formal royal relationship slowly evolved into something closer to personal trust. Palace insiders often spoke about how comfortable the Queen seemed when Sophie was present during private gatherings. She valued Sophie's calm demeanor, her ability to listen without judgment, and her habit of offering thoughtful advice only when it was truly needed. In a family where personalities could sometimes clash and tensions occasionally surfaced beneath the surface, Sophie's steady temperament became a rare asset. As the years passed, Sophie's responsibilities quietly expanded. She began taking on more engagements, more complex roles within the royal structure, and more involvement in projects that required careful diplomatic balance. Yet, even as her influence grew, she continued to operate in the same understated way that had defined her early years. She did not demand attention. She did not announce her ambitions. Instead, she built credibility slowly, step by step, until her voice began carrying more weight within the internal conversations that shaped the monarchy's direction. Observers who paid close attention began noticing something else as well. Sophie possessed a strategic mind that often went unnoticed by the public. She understood timing, optics, and the subtle art of positioning within a centuries-old institution that depended heavily on perception. Her decisions were rarely spontaneous. They were measured, deliberate, and often quietly effective. That ability to plan several steps ahead made her increasingly valuable during a period when the monarchy was navigating enormous generational change. Bagshot House, in many ways, became a symbol of that evolution. The estate had long been her home, but its meaning had slowly expanded beyond personal residence. It represented the quiet base from which Sophie carried out her growing responsibilities. It was a place where the public duties of royal life intersected with the private discussions that helped shape the future of the institution. For someone who had spent years building influence without seeking the spotlight, Bagshot House reflected the steady rise of a figure who understood how to operate within the monarchy's most delicate structures. By the time the Queen's final years arrived, Sophie's position within the royal family had changed dramatically from the early days of her marriage. She was no longer viewed as simply a supportive royal spouse. Instead, she had become something far more complex, a stabilizing force within a family that was navigating uncertainty, public scrutiny, and internal shifts of power. Senior royals increasingly relied on her judgment. Advisors respected her discretion. Even critics of the monarchy often acknowledges her reputation for professionalism and quiet competence. And that reputation inevitably changed how people interpreted the Bagshot House registration once it became known within palace circles. If the move had been carried out by someone impulsive or inexperienced, it might have been dismissed as a rash decision. But Sophie's track record suggested something very different. She was not known for acting without purpose. Every step in her royal life had been careful, deliberate, and strategically timed, which meant the registration of Bagshot House began to look less like an emotional reaction to the Queen's passing and more like the final piece of a long and carefully constructed puzzle. For years, Sophie had quietly strengthened her position within the monarchy, earning trust, building relationships, and learning the delicate rhythms of royal influence. And now, with one legal filing, it seemed possible that she had transformed that quiet influence into something far more tangible. Yet even as Sophie's influence quietly expanded, the registration of Bagshot House would trigger one of the most delicate questions the royal family had faced in decades. Royal property law is famously complex, a maze of trusts, ceremonial ownership, and centuries-old legal protections. Yet buried within that framework are rare provisions that can allow individual ownership under specific conditions. If Sophie's registration was valid, it may have activated one of the most obscure clauses in royal property law, one few people outside palace legal circles even know exists. To understand why the Bagshot House registration sent such quiet shockwaves through palace corridors, one must first step into the deeply layered legal world that governs royal estates. Unlike ordinary property, royal residences exist within a legal structure shaped by centuries of precedent. Ownership is rarely straightforward. Some properties belong to the Crown estate, others are privately held by members of the royal family, while many exist within a complicated web of trusts designed to ensure that historic residences remain tied to the monarchy across generations. This system evolved over hundreds of years, carefully constructed to protect royal assets from political upheaval, personal disputes, or sudden financial changes. Within this structure, the Crown estate occupies one of the most important roles. It is not personally owned by the monarch, but instead held in trust for the nation, generating revenue that supports public spending. Many historic properties fall under its umbrella, which means they cannot simply be transferred into private ownership without triggering legal and constitutional consequences. Then there are private royal holdings properties owned personally by members of the royal family, separate from the Crown estate, but still influenced by royal protocols and internal agreements. Navigating the boundary between those two categories is already complex, and when a residence like Bagshot House enters the discussion, the situation becomes even more delicate. For decades, Bagshot House existed within that grey area of royal estate management. It functioned as a private residence for Sophie and Prince Edward, yet its connection to the monarchy meant its legal status carried deeper implications than a standard property title. That ambiguity is exactly what makes the alleged registration so intriguing. If the document circulating through palace legal channels truly transferred ownership under Sophie's name, it suggests that a specific legal pathway was activated, one that bypassed the traditional layers of royal estate management. According to legal experts familiar with royal property structures, such a pathway could theoretically exist. Buried deep within certain estate arrangements are provisions that allow properties to shift into personal ownership under narrowly defined circumstances. These clauses are rarely used, partly because invoking them requires precise timing and careful legal preparation. They are designed for exceptional situations, moments when maintaining continuity within the monarchy may require rapid adjustments to property control. That detail brings attention back to the timing of the registration, because if Sophie's filing occurred exactly when insiders claim it did within minutes of the Queen's private funeral ending the mum, it may have carried legal significance beyond simple coincidence. In royal law, transitions between monarchs often trigger shifts in authority, estate management, and internal governance. Certain legal windows open briefly during these periods of transition, allowing changes to be made before new administrative structures fully settle into place. If the Bagshot House registration occurred during such a window, the speed of the filing suddenly begins to make sense. Within palace legal offices, that possibility reportedly sparked intense internal debate. Lawyers reviewing the document began asking careful questions about its technical validity. Some believed the registration could stand if all procedural requirements had been satisfied before submission. Others argued that a residence with Bagshot's historical connections should never have been transferred through a private filing alone. The discussions remained quiet, conducted in the measured language of legal interpretation rather than public controversy. One detail quickly became clear, however. Reversing the registration would not be simple. Once property ownership passes through certain legal channels, undoing the process can require extensive litigation or new legislation, Neither option would be attractive to a royal household determined to avoid public conflict. The monarchy has always preferred to resolve internal matters discreetly, far from the scrutiny of courts or media speculation. If Sophie's registration had been completed according to the letter of the law, challenging it could risk exposing the entire legal structure governing royal estates to public debate, and that possibility alone would be enough to make palace advisors cautious. For the monarchy, stability often depends on maintaining the appearance of continuity. Public disputes over property or inheritance can create exactly the kind of controversy the institution works so carefully to avoid. In that context, allowing the registration to stand quietly, without confirmation or denial, might appear to be the safest path forward, but the implications of such a decision would be significant. If Bagshot House truly became Sophie's personal property, it would represent a rare moment when a residence closely tied to royal tradition shifted into individual control. That shift could influence future discussions about other royal estates, setting a precedent that historians and legal scholars would likely examine for years to come. And perhaps that is why the conversation inside palace legal circles never truly ended. The document may have been processed, the registration may have moved forward, but the questions surrounding it continued to linger. Questions about timing, about authorization, about whether the move had been carefully planned long before the Queen's passing. Yet as those debates unfolded quietly among lawyers and advisors, something even more curious began to attract attention. Because despite the legal intrigue surrounding the registration, the palace itself offered no public response, no confirmation, no denial, just silence. But perhaps the most surprising twist was not the legal maneuver itself, it was the silence that followed. In modern royal history, controversies rarely remain hidden for long. Yet in this case, there was no statement, no clarification, no denial. The palace simply remained silent, and sometimes in the world of monarchy, silence can speak louder than any official announcement. At first, the story existed only as a whisper circulating among a small circle of palace staff and legal advisors. But whispers inside royal institutions rarely stay contained for long. The British monarchy operates within a unique ecosystem where rumour, speculation and historical curiosity constantly orb it around the palace walls. Journalists watch closely, historians listen carefully, and sooner or later, fragments of information begin slipping into the wider world. The alleged registration of Bagshot House was no exception. It began subtly. A few royal correspondents started hearing quiet suggestions that something unusual had occurred behind the scenes following the Queen's funeral. At first, the report sounded vague, nothing more than hints that a property matter had moved through palace legal channels with unusual speed. For experienced observers of royal affairs, however, even the faintest hint of irregularity could spark deeper curiosity. And once the name Bagshot House surfaced within those conversations, attention began to grow. Journalists started asking careful questions, not dramatic accusations, not bold headlines, just polite inquiries directed toward palace press offices. Was there any change in the legal status of Bagshot House? Had the estate recently undergone a formal registration adjustment? Could the palace confirm or deny the rumours circulating among certain legal circles? Under ordinary circumstances, the monarchy might have offered a brief clarification. Royal communications teams are well practiced in delivering measured responses designed to calm speculation without revealing unnecessary detail. But this time, something unusual happened. There was no response. Not a denial, not a clarification, not even the typical carefully worded statement acknowledging the question. Instead, inquiries were met with quiet deflection. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls received polite but vague replies, suggesting that property matters were private family issues. The palace did not confirm the registration, but it did not deny it either. The silence felt deliberate. Inside royal communications offices, aides reportedly adopted a careful strategy. Staff mem. RS were instructed to avoid discussing Bagshot House entirely. If journalists pressed further, the official guidance was simple: decline comment. The monarchy had used similar tactics before during sensitive internal matters. Silence, in many cases, can be the most effective response. By refusing to engage publicly, the palace often allows speculation to fade on its own. But this time, the absence of explanation had the opposite effect. Curiosity grew. Observers began asking why such an apparently simple question had triggered such firm restraint if nothing unusual had occurred. Why not dismiss the rumors with a brief statement? Why allow speculation to linger when a single sentence could close the matter entirely? The lack of answers only deepened the intrigue surrounding Bagshot House. Within the royal household itself, aides remained equally cautious. Staff members who privately understood the legal complexities of the situation were careful not to discuss the matter outside trusted circles. The monarchy has long operated on an unspoken rule: internal disputes should never spill into public view. Protecting the institution often requires maintaining a unified front, even when difficult questions arise behind closed doors. That tradition stretches back centuries. Royal families across history have learned that public conflict can weaken the very foundation of monarchy. When disagreements occur, they are usually managed quietly through negotiation and discretion. Rarely does the palace invite the outside world into those internal conversations. Instead, silence becomes a shield, preserving the image of stability even when uncertainty lingers beneath the surface. For insiders watching the Bagshot House situation unfold, that silence carried a powerful message. It suggested that whatever had happened was not considered a mistake requiring correction. If palace leaders, believed the registration had been improper, they could have intervened quickly. A public clarification could have been issued. Legal mechanisms could have been triggered to reverse the filing. Yet none of those actions appeared to occur. The registration remained untouched. That reality led some observers to draw a quiet conclusion: the silence may not have been avoidance at all. It may have been confirmation, because within the unique culture of royal institutions, silence often signals acceptance, not approval in the celebratory sense, but acknowledgement that a decision has been made at a level beyond public debate. If Bagshot House had indeed been registered under Sophie's name through legitimate legal channels, the palace might have concluded that allowing the matter to remain unspoken was the safest course of action. Over time, the absence of explanation began to take on a strange significance of its own. The story never exploded into a full public scandal, yet it never disappeared entirely either. It lingered at the edge of royal discourse, occasionally resurfacing whenever discussions about property, influence, or succession emerged, and perhaps that quiet endurance was the most revealing detail of all, because controversies built on misunderstanding usually fade once facts emerge. But mysteries sustained by silence have a way of lingering, quietly reshaping how events are remembered. And as the months passed without explanation, a final possibility began to emerge, one that would completely change how this moment is remembered. What if the registration of Bagshot House was never about property at all? What if it was about positioning, quietly securing influence within a monarchy, entering one of the most uncertain transitions in its history? Because in royal history, the most powerful moves are rarely the loudest ones. Sometimes they happen in silence, and inly reveal their meaning years later. By the time the whispers about Bagshot House had settled into the quiet corners of royal conversation, many observers began to reconsider what the moment truly represented. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple legal maneuver, a technical registration that only lawyers and administrators would normally care about. But within the unique structure of monarchy, property is rarely just property. Estates, residences, and ancestral homes often carry symbolic weight far beyond their legal descriptions. They represent influence, access, and proximity to the inner mechanisms of royal life. Bagshot House, with its quiet history and strategic position within the royal household, had always been more than a residence. It was a place connected to trust, responsibility, and the subtle balance of authority that exists within the family itself. Seen through that lens, the alleged registration begins to look less like a routine document and more like a moment of quiet positioning. At the exact moment the monarchy entered a new era, an era without the Queen, who had guided it for decades, control over a key royal residence may have shifted into the hands of someone who had spent years earning the trust of the institution. Sophie had never built her reputation through dramatic gestures, or public declarations. Her influence had grown gradually, shaped by patience and consistency, rather than ambition. That made the Bagshot decision feel even more intriguing. It suggested that the move, if deliberate, may have been part of a long-term understanding of how the monarchy was evolving. Because the reality facing the royal family in the years after the Queen's passing was unlike anything they had experienced in modern times, the monarchy was stepping into a period of transition filled with uncertainty, public scrutiny, and shifting generational roles. Long-standing traditions would inevitably face new pressures. New alliances within the family would emerge, and within that environment, the quiet control of certain royal spaces could hold unexpected importance. Residences like Bagshot House were not simply places where royals lived. They were places where conversations happened, private discussions that shaped strategy, resolved tensions, and helped guide the direction of the institution. If Sophie had indeed secured the legal status of Bagshot House at that precise moment, it may have strengthened her position within that evolving structure. Control of a residence tied to the family's internal operations could provide stability during a time when stability was desperately needed. It could also symbolize a deeper shift within the monarchy's internal dynamics, a recognition that influence was no longer defined solely by titles or proximity to the throne, but by trust, reliability, and the ability to navigate the complexities of royal life without destabilizing the institution itself. Some historians may one day look back on this moment as a subtle turning point. They may argue that the registration reflected an understanding shared quietly among senior royals, an acknowledgement that the monarchy needed steady figures capable of safeguarding its traditions while adapting to an unpredictable future. In that interpretation, the Bagshot move would not have been a challenge to royal authority, but a reinforcement of it, ensuring that one of the monarchy's quieter pillars remained under the guidance of someone the Queen herself had trusted deeply. And that possibility inevitably leads to the most intriguing question of all. Was the move truly Sophie's decision alone, or had it been quietly approved, perhaps even encouraged, by figures within the royal family who understood the importance of securing certain foundations during a time of change? The palace never answered that question, and perhaps it never will. Royal institutions often rely on ambiguity to protect their internal balance. When explanations are offered, they can invite further scrutiny. When silence is maintained, the story gradually settles into the realm of royal mystery. What remains undeniable is that Bagshot House now carries a different meaning within the broader narrative of the monarchy. It has become a symbol of how power within royal life can shift quietly, almost invisibly, through decisions that rarely appear in official announcements. The estate that once represented stability has now become part of a larger story about transition, influence, and the delicate negotiations that shape the future of the crown. Historians, commentators, and royal watchers will likely continue debating the true significance of the registration for years to come. Some will see it as a clever legal maneuver. Others will interpret it as a carefully timed act of loyalty to the Queen's legacy, and still others may believe it represents something even more strategic, a quiet repositioning within the monarchy's inner circle during one of the most sensitive periods in its modern history. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the story is its enduring mystery. No official confirmation has ever clarified exactly how the decision unfolded, who authorized it, or why the timing aligned so precisely with the Queen's farewell. The answers may exist somewhere within private conversations, legal archives, or memories shared only among those closest to the moment. Yet those answers remain hidden, protected by the same tradition of discretion that has defined royal life for centuries. In the end, the truth behind Sophie's alleged registration of Bagshot House may never be publicly confirmed, but one fact remains impossible to ignore. At the exact moment the monarchy was saying goodbye to its longest-serving queen, a quiet legal move was made that could echo through the royal family for generations. And sometimes in royal history, the most important decisions are the ones the world almost never notices. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.